Hello, everyone. Welcome to this episode of Jeem, the podcast for the Arab American writers, filmmakers, artists, and creative people, hosted by Wissam Al-Maligi. I'm Wissam Al-Maligi, director of the Center for Arab American Studies. And today we are very happy to welcome Julia Yezbick, filmmaker and educator, professor at Wayne State, who has worked and produced films in Metro Detroit, and we'll be talking about her passion for filmmaking, what brought her here, what her projects are, and what her interests are, and what her future prospects are. Julia, welcome to St. Jeem and to the University of Michigan Dearborn.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. It's great to be here.
Thank you. Let's start from your background. Where are you from and what brought you here?
Well, I am from Michigan, actually. I grew up in Ypsilanti, and my family is actually several generations deep here in Detroit. So this is where I'm from. My dad's side is Lebanese, so they're the side that gives me my Arab American heritage. But they came here when my grandfather was born here, so I'm a third generation Lebanese American.
Awesome. So you're a local filmmaker, local Lebanese American. I mean, and have you always lived have you lived in Dearborn or Metro Detroit for a long time or?
No, not always. I was gone for a good chunk of my adult life. I traveled abroad and did a master's at the University of Manchester in the UK about awesome. 20 years ago. And then came back to the US and lived in various places along the East Coast. I taught at Virginia Commonwealth University in Richmond for a little while in their anthropology department. Before starting my PhD, I then did a PhD at Harvard and was living in Cambridge for several years before kind of eventually making my way back to Detroit in the Detroit area.
Oh, what a journey. So anthropology, you said. I mean, so what got you interested in filmmaking? Has this always been an interest of yours? Did you develop it at a specific stage of your life and your career?
Yeah, I actually, when I was an undergraduate student at Michigan State, I had a professor who had a really big impact on me, who a couple of years after I graduated, he unfortunately passed away from cancer, but he taught a class called visual anthropology. And at the time I was trying to kind of determine what I wanted to study and what I wanted my major to be. And had been an art major, and then I found anthropology and really got interested in it. And so when I found his class, visual anthropology, and saw this kind of crossover between the history of filmmaking within the discipline of anthropology, I got really excited because I thought, well, this can bring these two loves of mine together. And that set me on a whole journey because he really encouraged me. And I kind of self-taught myself most of my early filmmaking, just borrowing cameras and using whatever software I could find at the library or whatnot. And then after taking his class, I pursued a master's degree in visual anthropology at the University of Manchester in the UK. And so that really kind of set me on that journey of really kind of locating my filmmaking practice within this kind of academic realm. Manchester's program was really, really focused on observational cinema, which is like a whole approach to documentary filmmaking that's very kind of hands off, like you don't direct so much. You're there to kind of observe and follow what's happening and what's unfolding in real time. And so that really gave me a kind of grounding in my practice. And then by the time I was ready to go back for the PhD, I found the program at Harvard. At the time, they were just getting the sensory ethnography lab up and running, which is a program that does allow for this kind of crossover between anthropology and documentary filmmaking. And so I was really interested in Harvard's program because they took a little bit of a different stance than most. They really allowed for more kind of aesthetic experimentations within nonfiction practices. And the program at Manchester was pretty dogmatic and like strict about like what you should and should not do as a documentary filmmaker. And so I was kind of drawn to the program at Harvard because it was really kind of exploding some of the preconceived notions about like what quote unquote ethical practice looked like and how it needed to look a certain way, and really kind of allowed for a more artistic interpretation to come into those processes and relationships really that come out of nonfiction practice. So I was interested in that and ended up, that's what drew me to Harvard. And I did the whole PhD there, which was kind of a dual degree in a sense. It's like you do a full PhD in anthropology, and then they have like a track that allows you to do filmmaking alongside that. And you end up creating works and defending both your film work and your written dissertation. So it was
wow.
intense.
That's pretty intense. Yeah.
Yeah, it was very intense.
But I mean, you're a creative person and you're doing great. So how can you talk a little bit more about this link in your work between your different backgrounds, basically, like as an Arab American, but also as an anthropologist and as a filmmaker? Is there any connection that we can see in your work? Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think my interest in anthropology really, in some ways it was me trying to find my own place in the world. I think that's everybody's interest in anthropology, actually, by studying other cultures and other customs and practices. I think that one thing for me is that when I was a kid, growing up in Ypsi and Ann Arbor area, like we weren't really plugged into an Arab American community. In fact, I didn't even think of myself as Arab American until my adult life. It wasn't something that was really instilled in myself and my siblings as children. Even my grandfather actually didn't really speak Arabic. So as soon as his family got here, they kind of just taught their children English. And so like, there was only so many sort of remnants that I had to hold on to, like, food items and things like that kind of cued me in later, like, oh, that's why grandma always brought tabbouleh or whatever, So to kind of get to your original question, I mean, I think that part of my interest in anthropology was also always a self-interest, an interest in learning more about my own cultural background and heritage. And I think that's probably always the case. And so I would kind of toggle back and forth between initially making films that had nothing, that were not personal at all, and really focusing on other people and places, but always interested in that kind of relationship of people to place and what that means and how they come to define it, or how they come to have certain ties to land or to cultural heritage, or how that cultural heritage also travels, right? And changes. And so initially my filmic practice was very much about kind of embedding myself in the customs of other peoples in other places of the world and learning about them. And then once the pandemic hit, this was, many, many years later, we're all stuck at home and we can't go just like, immerse ourselves in other people's lives in the same way because we were all quarantined. And that's when actually I really started to make more personal work and really kind of look at, actually it was a little before the pandemic, actually. I became a parent in 2016. I had my daughter, and that also made me kind of have to, I think, look a little closer to home and not quite travel as much. And it got me really kind of interested in thinking about making some work that was more personal. And so in 2018, I traveled to Beirut and did a residency there. And I had two kids at the time. I had a 6-month-old and a 2-year-old that I brought with me and did like a month-long residency. And we stayed in Beirut. And I had never been to Lebanon before, and neither had my dad or his generation, anyone from his generation. So the last person who had been was actually a great uncle of mine. And I went and talked with him before I left and got like all this, whatever I could glean. Right. Yeah. And so it was great. I went for a month and did a residency and shot a lot of Super 8. I was shooting with Super 8 millimeter at the time, mostly somewhat out of convenience, but also I was interested in playing around with the idea of using that medium, which was created really in the mid 20th century for home movies. It was meant to be consumer, easy to use, consumer grade, go shoot your family vacation kind of a camera. And the fact that it was also really kind of like dated to that mid 20th century was important to me because that was a time when my family was moving a lot the film that came out of that, which played at the Ann Arbor Film Festival in March, was really kind of looking at some of those histories of what I called leavings, of like these series of leavings of like my family leaving Beirut and then my family sort of leaving the Detroit proper area in the mid 20th century as a part of like larger migration patterns that some people call white flight that happened at that time. And so I was really kind of interested in using Super 8 for that reason too, to kind of comment a little bit critically on like home movies as well and like what that means. But anyways, I've strayed a bit from your question. I'm trying to remember now what your
no. You've actually answered it. How you're putting anthropology and film together.
Yeah, well, I have a deep interest in also the history of film practices within anthropology. You know, sometimes in hindsight, I actually think I probably should have been a historian of science, really, because I think I was actually more interested in the history of anthropology than in actually doing it myself.
Okay.
But the history of film and photography within anthropology is really interesting because it tells us a lot about how we have come to think of the veracity of images and the objectivity or subjectivity that is embedded within them. And so for me to kind of shift also from making work that was focused on trying to convey some kind of reality-based experiences of other people to shifting to doing more personal work was also about playing at that boundary a little bit as well, of like thinking about what are the objective and subjective places of overlap in this medium. You know, I don't really think any of it's actually objective at all.
Yeah, I was just going to ask, I mean, a lot of people, particularly with, for instance, literature, not necessarily filmmaking, believe that a first work or first major work or big work is usually somewhat autobiographical. Do you feel this way with film as well? Even if it's not a narrative film, but it's documentary, do you feel that this happened to you? Whether in something that was actually produced or that you were just experimenting with?
I mean, there's always some part of you in it, right?
Yeah.
This is part of the debate that came out in the really kind of 1950s in anthropology. You had Margaret Mead, there's this great debate that was published between Margaret Mead and Gregory Bateson, who was her ex-husband at the time. And I think Stuart Brand, the guy who did the whole Earth catalog, moderates the whole conversation.
Yeah.
And it's fascinating because they're just sitting there debating whether or not you can actually remove yourself, really, is essentially the argument.
Yeah.
Because Margaret Mead believed you could set the camera on a tripod and just let it run and it would just record some kind of objective reality, you know, like a window on the world. And Gregory Bateson was like, absolutely not. There's no way.
That's not going to happen. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I think, you know, I've always kind of taken more of Gregory Bateson's side on that. But, you know, to fast forward decades, I think nobody thinks any of it's objective anymore. I mean, there's always decisions. You decide what to shoot. You decide when to turn the camera on. And all of those decisions are informed by personal experiences, by things you've read, things you've seen, whatever. To some extent, there's always some part of you in it. And actually, probably now that I think about it, my first, I would say, bigger successful work was a piece called Into the Hinterlands that premiered at the Berlin International Film Festival in 2015. That one was like a 40-minute long, pretty experimental nonfiction piece that was looking at the creative process of a group of artists in Detroit that have a performance ensemble. And that ensemble is called the Hinterlands. I mean, it's no exaggeration to call their practice ecstatic. They are interested in using physical exhaustion as a tool to break through into other creative realms. And so they would have these really physically rigorous training sessions. And I've worked with them for almost a year and filmed about once a week for almost a year and did these trainings with them. Yeah. And the entire process for me, the experiment of it was really actually trying to see how much of my physical body's presence I could convey through the camera in order to convey to the audience the physicality of what it was that they were doing. And so in that sense, I was kind of really playing at that boundary and those edges of like, how much of me is in here and how much of it is buried and how much, even if it's just a gestural movement, can I give some sort of sense of the mind and the body that is behind the camera. And I think at this time too was at that point, like the GoPro camera was just coming out and people were getting really excited about it. And they were like, like body cam footage, for example, that cops use.
Yes. Yeah.
On the one hand, it's incredibly embodied because it's attached to a body, but at the same time, it's got this sense of detachment, of surveillance, of just like an eye, a sort of disembodied eye that you can
disembodied
anywhere.
Yeah.
And so I was really pushing back.
It's like the all-seeing eye or something.
Right. I was really kind of trying to say, like, what is, what are the kind of boundaries of a consciousness, if you will, that we can convey through the gestural movements of the camera?
Yeah, it's like the stream of consciousness in literature, basically, in one way or another, maybe. Yeah. Like projected on what you're seeing. Yeah. It's a bit of since you've been in the UK, a bit of a James Joyce, but in cinema or something like that. And
yeah, maybe.
Portrait of the Artist of the Young Man. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So that project was really experimental in that regard. It was very much trying to determine, like, what are the edges or boundaries of the body behind the camera's presence in the end result. Yeah.
How do you see things like maybe Judith Butler or other, like, I don't know, or theorists, or the idea of the gaze? I mean, whether the male gaze or the gaze in general, it was different parts. I mean, is this something that you, as an Arab American filmmaker, is there like gender, race aspects of that, or like ethnicity? Are there aspects at all that are related to some kind of a cultural or a gender gaze somehow in filmmaking that you encounter or that you are aware of? Is this like on your radar at all, or?
It has to be. There's so many ways I could answer that question. Because I think what you're also asking is about positionality as well.
Yes.
Right? And so you cannot go and make films, even if you're making them only about yourself, and not understand that part of what you're doing is situating a positionality.
Yeah.
And all of that has to do with, how you situate that gaze, where you place yourself in a way. So, I mean, I've had all kinds of experiences like this. Like, I'm trying to give you just a few examples. I was doing a project once, a documentary project that for an arts administration organization in Detroit. And they were asking me, as an anthropologist and a filmmaker, to go and do some short videos about a group of artists, about 5 different artists, to help potential donors understand better what the artists needed, really, and what was most helpful for them to do their work in Detroit. And I was talking to this one artist who is African American, and I gave him my info sheet, like very by the book IRB style, like, here's the info sheet, here's, what this will entail. And I think somewhere in the info sheet, it used the word ethnographic. And because this is, my background, and a lot of my interview methods, I would come out of ethnographic methodologies, like, semi-structured interviews, like what we're doing right now. And he was really offended. And he I think in part because I am not African American, and he felt like it was insensitive to use that term in a conversation with him that drew upon the colonialist histories of anthropology and the ways that anthropologists have gone all over the world and sort of studied people of color, right? And it was really interesting. It was a really great conversation, and it led to some really productive pushback to the project overall, that we did change a lot, the way we were approaching it and things. But like something like that, for example, I had to understand the positionality of myself in Detroit, yes, Arab American, but white passing, right?
That's true.
And how using that word in that moment was being received by this person that I was trying to interview and film. And so I think, like, there's the racial aspect there. There's the gender aspect. This is a hugely male dominated field, filmmaking. So all the time I am confronted with people, assuming that I don't know how to use the equipment or something like that.
Yeah, carry it for you.
Yes. Yeah. This kind of tech bros, we call them, the tech bros.
Oh, I like that.
Yeah. But all of this, in terms of like how it comes through in the work as well, this is where I think for me, it gets at the core of what I think filmmaking is really about, which is about relationships. It's about relationality. And if you don't have good relationships with people that you're working with or people that you're filming, it comes through in the work, and vice versa. When there's not just rapport, but like a deeper trust, and there's a deeper sense of collaboration that also comes out in the work. And so all of that has to do with coming to a project with an understanding of who you are, of how you're positioning yourself, of who you're working with, of how you're uplifting people through those relationships of working together. A lot of my work, I don't usually work with a really big crew, but my work is deeply collaborative. And so I really like to kind of use my practice as a way to get to know other people's artistic practices as well, other artists that I bring in and whether they're filmmakers or not. Often they're not, actually. That process of working together is, I don't just choose anyone, it's like by the end, we're like family, like I'm very careful about who I work with because I want that process to be one of utmost respect and a way of like building up a relationality that is fruitful and beneficial really for everyone involved.
Mm. Do you mention the tech sort of voice, but I mean, I'll just take the tech part from that. How does the technology or the equipment impact your work? I mean, can you talk a little bit about the technical aspect of that? You mentioned this a little bit, and maybe also the industry part. I mean, you've been talking about the creative part and also the cultural part. Can you talk a little bit more about the industry part, including, I don't know, maybe funding or including the tech that you use? I know I've experimented sort of with different aspects of that. How does that impact, or does it help shape your work? Do you choose that, or is it imposed because of like financial reasons? I mean, how does that work in your filmmaking?
Yeah, kind of all of the above. I mean, I have shot quite a bit on digital media, and also I use Super 8 and 16 millimeter. More Super 8 though. Initially, that was somewhat an economic choice because Super 8 film stock used to be quite a bit cheaper than 16 millimeter. Now they're not so different. They're almost the same cost. Yeah, it's a really different process if you're shooting analog versus digital. I prefer digital if I'm doing like a longer form documentary project because I can let the camera run longer and really just put that kind of time in. And having that kind of time is so crucial to getting the good moments of any story if it's nonfiction. Whereas if I'm shooting on Super 8, my process is much more one of almost like collecting images over time and then amassing them and then sort of looking at what I have and finding what the story is in there. So it depends on the project. Like Into the Hinterlands was shot on a small digital camera because I needed to be able to shoot for really long periods of time. And I think I shot, oh my God, I don't know, 150 hours of footage for that. Something, an absurd amount that I then, sifted through to get it down to the 40-minute piece. Because it kind of needed that because its process was also experimentation through this kind of like embodied camera industrial practice. But when I shot Mauritania, that one, I mean, I included stuff that I shot even 10, 11 years ago because I was just collecting little bits of things over a long period of time. Mm-hmm. And some of it's 16 millimeter, some of it's Super 8. It's also a very different process because I'm not recording the audio at the same time. So then I also am collecting the audio as well and really thinking about what kinds of audio I want to pair with the images then. Some of it being ambient sounds, some of it being voiceover, some of it being really textured kinds of things, like the sounds of the radiator in my house or something like that. Yeah.
Looking of projects, I mean, you mentioned your projects and the tech part, and earlier you talked about concepts like that you thought of like leavings. What motivates a new project for you? Is it experimenting with new texts or new like methods, or is it experimenting with concepts and themes? I mean, what is, or is it all of them? I mean, some artists are motivated by an idea, some are by like experimenting, like let's say in painting, like trying different techniques or strategies. So, I mean, what works for you?
Yeah, that's a great question. I mean,
thank you.
I think it kind of all of the above. It depends. I used to be much more, well, when I was finishing up the dissertation at Harvard, the projects that I made during that time, there was 2 films that came out of that. One called How to Rust and one called Into the Hinterlands. And both were very intertwined with my dissertation research. So those were really what I think of as like a process of inquiry, where I was using my filmmaking practice as a way to get at different aspects of the things that I was studying in the dissertation that I couldn't really just get at by writing and reading. It was
more somatic in a sense, like more somatic. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yeah. More somatic and also more conceptual, more metaphorical, things that I just felt weren't there in this kind of like written tome, this 300-page like doorstop that came out of it.
Enough writing.
Yeah. And also dissertation writing is like a very particular kind of writing.
Oh yeah, of course.
No one should ever read.
Don't say that.
Don't say that too. But so with those projects, I really feel like my practice is growing out of a process of inquiry in a very academic way. With other projects, like the more personal work that I made from maybe 2018 till the present, it was more personal expression, kind of going through stuff in my personal life that I was trying to work through. A lot of it having to do with becoming a mom and grappling with motherhood and what that meant and changing things in my home life. And then I think sometimes there is the other tech side of it too, where I'm very adamant about the fact that you can't really separate form and content, that they inevitably will be enmeshed. Sometimes I start with a form and then the content comes out of that or finds its way out of that. And sometimes it's a little bit different. But like, for example, right now I've been thinking a lot about some of the newer technology, AI generated videos and images, and thinking about making a new essay film that's working through that medium to kind of provide some kind of critique on the relationship between words and images in large language models. So I've been doing some kind of research around that, and we'll probably make a short, just a short essay piece. I call it, it has 2 titles so far because it's still just in my head. One title is This Is Not a Film, and the other title is Captcha versus Magritte, because I'm interested in looking at Rene Magritte's This Is Not a Pipe image, which is actually called The Treachery of Images, where he painted a picture of a pipe and said, "This is not a pipe."
This is not a pipe. Yeah.
So
it's like challenging the sensory perception, basically.
Or even just thinking about representation, right? But also word and image relationships, and how large language models are entirely built on this idea of tagging, right? Of like one relationship of an image and a word to describe it, which takes, as you probably are well aware, as a writer, like takes all poetry and metaphor out of the question.
Yes. Yeah. And there's the issue of like, I don't know, a definer and the defined. I mean, who defines or who says that this is what and
Absolutely.
Yeah. And it's a question of agency too. But since you mentioned that, is there like a favorite work you have? Or, I mean, I know the classic answer by a lot of creative people that they're all my offspring, they're all my children. Okay. Is that your answer? I mean, that's valid too. Or do you feel something has special place?
That's really tough. I mean, it's interesting. There's 4 main pieces that come to mind, which is How to Rust and Into the Hinterlands, the 2 I made as a part of that came out of my dissertation research. And then Roses, Pink and Blue, which is a short 5-minute piece that I made a couple years ago.
Mm.
And I was dealing with the grief of losing an aunt that was very dear to me. And then Maratain, which I just released
Yes, I
in
know.
March.
Yeah.
And those two are much more personal than the earlier two. And so they're very different in that way. Also, the earlier two are digital and the latter two are on analog film.
Oh.
And
yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, they're all quite, they're all pretty different.
Why
I feel like they also represent really different points in my life too.
Different phases, different. Yeah. Why Martin? Why? I mean, is this the only film where you have an Arabic title?
Yeah.
Okay.
It is. Yeah. Yeah, it's the only one where I have an Arabic title, and I don't speak Arabic, so I had to bring in a translator and help translate all of the voiceover and check all my subtitling for me. That I
love that. It was great. Yeah.
Yeah, she was great. But yeah, I think like for this one, I mean, it's my latest film, so I think it still kind of feels like a baby, that I'm trying to push out into the world. But also it's probably the most deeply personal one I've made. And also it took me a really long time. I worked on it for many, many years.
When you said it's like a baby you push out of the world, I mean, there are a couple of theories about what happens with a creative work when it's done. Some people believe that words die when they are spoken, like Nizar would say, and some people would believe that they like actually acquire a life of their own once they're out there. Do you subscribe to any of those theories? Do you have a different one as a creative person? What do you think happens to your work when it's done?
I think they get a life of their own when they're out there. Yeah. Because, I mean, at least in my experience with films, people will take their own interpretations from it. And that's in many ways, that's the beauty of it, is that I feel like I've actually done something right if I make especially a slightly longer form work. I think Maratain is a good example because to me it's about a lot of things. It's at its core, it's about trying to find a relationship to one's identity, but it's also about a critique of colonialism and patriarchy and nationalism and all these other things that try to define who we are or tell us who we are. And if people don't pick all of that up, I'm okay with that. And they might pick up some tiny little part, or they might have one part of it that resonates for them. And that's their sort of takeaway from the film, right? And they might miss all the other parts that to me are there, that are subtly there, that are these kind of undercurrents of thematic or critical kind of thinking that's in it. And if they totally miss 3/4 of it, but there's that one little part that reaches them, that's how they see the film. And I think that's beautiful. I think that's lovely. Yeah. And I think that really is the power of the medium, is that you have to give up that sense of control, of totality, of being able to completely convey an entire concept in totality to other people, right? You can only throw it out there and let it just fall where it lands, and
which is the exact opposite of while you're in the creative process and you feel that you're in total control, and then suddenly from almost total control to absolutely no control whatsoever. So you experience both. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah.
Well, okay. I mean, what about your you mentioned a little bit that what you're working on. Can you talk a little bit more about what's next for you? Are you working on something that you can share, or whether just an idea or an actual project you're working on right now, or that we can expect to see soon?
Yeah. I mean, I can't say that you can expect to see it soon, but
oh yeah.
I work pretty slowly. Yeah.
But you produce great stuff. So yeah,
10 years ago.
You produce wonderful stuff, so take your time. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I do like taking my time with my work. It kind of just comes out when it comes out.
Sure. Yeah.
But yeah, so I mentioned the Captcha versus Magritte film, which I think will be a short, small piece, not like a huge body of work or big project. It's just something that I've been kind of like rattling around in my brain for a little while. So that one to me I'm trying to still kind of develop it conceptually a little bit more. I think that one thing I've really felt strongly in the last, 5 to 10 years is that I really want to push my work to be more political, really, and more critical, and have more the social critique side of it a little bit more in the forefront. Because coming out of Harvard, it was very easy to just intellectualize everything and get esoteric really quickly and really kind of pretentious, and like at some level where like you're talking to like two people. And so I also feel like, given the state of the world today, it's really incumbent upon artists and creatives to speak to what's going on, and to not just sort of, in some ways you can't not do it either. In some ways, everything that you make is political in some way, even if it's refusing to be political or take some kind of a stance. Yeah. And so that project, in looking at the relationship between words and images, and how AI is utilizing that as a literal, like huge database structure. For me, the kind of political project in that would be to kind of like tease out a little bit more of like what's lost when we start to reduce things to such a degree, right? Like, but also like the harm that can be done to people and identities and things like that in that kind of reduction. But I'm also trying to develop right now, or I have been kind of slowly, very, very slowly trying to develop a film that is still rooted somewhat in the research that I did for my dissertation, which was really looking at housing stock in Detroit. And this one is tentatively called Domus. And it's conceptually, I'm interested in looking at how the concept of the home, and really kind of like the physical structure of the home has changed so much over, even if just the life of the city of Detroit, for example, where, during the 1920s, when we had this big building boom and lots of single family homes were built and the city kind of sprawled outward, that single family home became the sort of icon of the American dream and what was attainable if you got, this kind of middle class livelihood. And then, moving into the kind of post-industrial decades where lots of these single family homes are decaying and rotting or already demolished, and how they became icons of something else. But way I want to move with this piece is looking at architectural forms as movement, which seems really unusual. But I heard this fabulous talk that Fred Moten gave at MIT. I just watched it online. I found it on YouTube. And he talks about this idea of Bildung, the German word, which has within its etymology this idea of like creating and picturing, not just building. And so he has this beautiful lecture where he talks about how like the projects, for example, as in like urban projects, but also the project of a creative project, have these etymological roots, and how really, when you think about it, like social movements even are related to the structures in which they arise out of, like the literal physical structures of an urban landscape. And so I've been kind of grappling with all of those ideas, particularly in Detroit, since my dissertation research was here. This was my field site, and thinking about how like urban fabrics have the ability to both foster and stifle social movements, and how human actors then take those various forms and utilize them in ways that they weren't maybe intended to, but to give them agency and to do the things that they want to do with them. I'm interested in how like the home, or the single family home, is really sort of a microcosm of the broader ways in which we interact in society, and can be like politically radical in that as well. Like how we structure our homes can be a smaller reflection of how we structure society. And so looking at that as something that can be transformative and can be about movement and movement building in a kind of social way.
This is all I'm very much looking forward to seeing all those projects when they're out there.
Me too.
yeah, I'm sure.
They're just ideas right now.
but they sound great. Okay, Julie, I think this is the end of our interview. Do you have any comments you want to make, or anything you'd like to add? Questions that I didn't ask, maybe?
I guess would just say, anyone who listens to the podcast, I would encourage them to reach out to me.
That'll be great.
To hearing from people. I'm easy to find online and through my website. And
perfect. Does that include like students or like people who are aspiring to enter the world of like documentaries and filmmaking?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think that, like you were saying at the beginning before we started recording, I think that this area, it's, U of M Dearborn and Wayne State, like, and our students, like, there is a real good locality and sense of like community around the film.
Yep.
Film world is very small here, but it's very tight knit, and I feel like there's ways in which we can serve our communities well if we stay in conversation with our neighbors.
Perfect. Perfect. Thank you so much for offering that, and we'll do that. Yeah. Right. Thank you so much, Julia, and looking forward to seeing your work soon and to more events on our campus. Where you can show your films and present your work more and connect more with our students. Thank you, Julia. Have a good day. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye.
This week's episode was hosted by Wissam El-Maliki. It was produced and edited by Muhammad Jafar. Our theme song was composed by Isra Darwish, and our logo was designed by Maysara Abdelhaq. Scene Jeem is brought to you by the Center for Arab American Studies at the University of Michigan Dearborn and the Arab American National Museum. It is funded by the University of Michigan Arts Initiative and the Center for Arab American Studies at the University of Michigan Dearborn. Check our website, scenejeempodcast.com, for more info on our guests. Thank you for listening.